Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today's episode explores a quiet kind of strength that often goes unnoticed until it's too late to ignore. It's not loud, it doesn't demand attention, and it rarely defends itself. But when it shows up, it changes how people see you, and more importantly, how you see yourself. Sometimes the loudest applause comes from the same people who once tried to erase you. They never imagined you would grow, especially not where everyone could see it. There's something almost cinematic about watching someone face a toxic situation with grace instead of anger. It feels like watching a disaster get neutralized with calm precision. You know it could have turned ugly, but instead, you walk away impressed by the control. Research even suggests that people who stay composed in moments of embarrassment or pressure are often perceived as more powerful than those who lash out. Because control carries the energy of confidence, while chaos often reveals insecurity dressed up as boldness. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't rush to defend yourself. You didn't post indirect messages or look for validation. You simply remained steady, grounded, and unaffected while life tested your emotional limits. And whether people admit it or not, they noticed. Some respected it, some envied it. Others tried to imitate it and failed halfway through. But what they didn't understand was this. Your silence wasn't passive, it was intentional. You recognized that reacting would only add fuel to the situation, so you chose to step back and let things collapse on their own. You didn't chase revenge because you understood something deeper. Reality has a way of correcting narratives without your interference. And now, people aren't impressed because you argued better. They're impressed because you mastered yourself. In a world that thrives on overreaction, you became the unexpected turn in the story, the one who stayed composed when everything seemed designed to break you. And that's where your real story begins. When chaos came your way, people expected a reaction. They were waiting for you to lose control, to crack under pressure, to give them something they could use. But you didn't. You stayed still long enough to understand what was really happening. You read the situation, the intention behind it, and the trap hidden inside it. You knew that reacting too quickly would only serve their narrative. So instead, you paused, not out of confusion, but out of awareness. That pause wasn't weakness. It was calculation. While everything around you was loud and messy, you stayed observant. You noticed the subtle shifts, the hidden motives, the people who quietly revealed who they truly were. You understood that decisions driven by emotion often lead to regret, so you allowed yourself the space to think clearly before responding. That level of composure unsettles people. It makes them uncomfortable when they can't predict you or provoke you. Because for many, chaos feels like control, but you showed something different. You proved that real power is quiet, steady, and intentional. You didn't ignore your emotions. You managed them. You gave logic the lead and let your feelings settle instead of steering the situation. You understood that not every comment deserves a reply, and not every situation deserves your presence. Sometimes maturity isn't about rising above everything. Sometimes it's about staying grounded while everything else spins out of control. You didn't match their energy. You refined your own. And in doing so, you shifted the entire dynamic. Because reacting might give you temporary control, but self-mastery gives you something far more lasting. You also came to understand that truth doesn't need constant defending. It doesn't require endless explanations or desperate clarifications. It simply needs time. When people distorted your story or spread half-truths, you didn't chase every rumor trying to correct it. You knew that over-explaining often looks like insecurity, especially to those already committed to misunderstanding you. So instead, you stepped back. You allowed things to unfold naturally. You trusted that false narratives eventually collapse under their own weight. Lies can move fast, but they don't last long without something to sustain them. And your silence denied them that fuel. Most people want immediate justice. They want to clear their name instantly, to fix how they're perceived. But you were patient enough to let time reveal what needed to be revealed. And when the truth finally surfaced, it carried more weight because you never forced it. The same people who doubted you began to question themselves. The same voices that spoke against you lost their certainty, because your silence wasn't empty, it was observant. It was allowing everything to expose itself naturally. There's something powerful about that. When you stop trying to prove yourself, you give truth the space to speak on your behalf. And when it does, it lands in a way no argument ever could. And then there's the way you handled everything internally. You didn't let negativity pull you into it. You treated the situation with precision, almost like someone handling something fragile but dangerous. You didn't jump into the mess to fight it. You approached it with clarity. You saw the manipulation, the subtle attempts to provoke you, the underlying intention to drag you into chaos. But instead of reacting impulsively, you responded thoughtfully. You removed what needed to be removed without damaging your own character in the process. That's a rare kind of discipline, because negativity wants participation. It wants you emotionally involved, defensive, reactive. It wants you distracted, but you refused to give it that access. You understood that your reaction was the outcome they were hoping for, and by denying them that, you shifted the entire outcome. Your calm didn't just protect you, it exposed them. The more steady you remained, the more their behavior stood out. The more controlled you were, the more chaotic they appeared. And without saying much at all, you changed how the entire situation was perceived. That's the quiet power most people overlook. Not the ability to fight back, but the ability to remain untouched while everything else unravels. The same people who once expected you to lose control ended up exposing how unstable they really were. You didn't go low to meet them. You moved smarter than that. You kept your energy clean, and in doing so, you quietly dismantled everything they had planned. What could have turned into a mess became something precise, almost surgical. You didn't need approval or revenge. You needed clarity, and you proved something most people miss. The way to handle dirt isn't by throwing more of it, but by staying untouched by it. There was a moment where you could have easily fought back. You had enough to expose everything, to flip the narrative, to embarrass the very people who tried to bring you down. The opportunity was right there. But instead of acting from anger, you chose awareness. You understood something deeper, that reacting out of rage doesn't make you victorious. It just shows how quickly you can abandon your own standards. So you stepped back. Not because you lacked strength, but because you refused to lower yourself to a level that didn't reflect who you've become. You realized your peace held more value than being right in front of people who had already decided their version of the story. That's when it clicked. Dignity isn't silence for the sake of avoidance, it's control with intention. It's choosing to remain whole when everything around you tries to provoke a reaction out of you. You let people speak, assume, and misinterpret, knowing that peace doesn't need validation to exist. And that kind of restraint unsettles those who thrive on chaos, because they can't manipulate what doesn't react. While they stayed loud, you stayed observant. While they created scenes, you created growth. You didn't need to answer immediately because you understood something time always proves. It remembers everything. And when the truth eventually found its way to the surface, it carried more weight because you didn't force it. You allowed things to unfold naturally. What could have been a public conflict became a private transformation. You learned that integrity outlives temporary wins. Not every victory needs to be visible, and not every loss is actually a defeat. Sometimes the real success is walking away without losing yourself. Your silence was never surrender, it was strategy. While others mistook it for confusion, you were paying attention. You were watching patterns reveal themselves, noticing how quickly intentions become visible when you stop explaining yourself. You understood that every reaction gives away information, so you became selective. You didn't withdraw, you observed. And the more you stayed quiet, the more people revealed who they really were. They spoke more, showed more, exposed more. You noticed everything. The tone, the timing, the subtle shifts. You saw who remained steady, who changed sides, and who kept trying to provoke something out of you. But you didn't interrupt the process. You let it unfold, because time has a way of exposing what words often can't. Your silence became something they couldn't interpret. They didn't know if you were processing or planning, and that uncertainty made them uneasy. In a world where everyone feels the need to constantly explain themselves, your restraint created pressure, not through force, but through unpredictability. And when you finally chose to speak, it wasn't noise, it was deliberate. Every word carried clarity instead of emotion. You didn't react quickly, you responded correctly. Silence gave you something most people never access: perspective. It allowed you to separate what was real from what was reactive. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were never listening to understand in the first place. You also refused to play the version of yourself they tried to create. They wanted you to become the problem, to act unstable, to confirm the story they had already built about you. Everything they did was meant to provoke that reaction, but you saw through it. The moment you didn't respond the way they expected, their entire narrative started to fall apart, because your anger would have been their proof. Your reaction would have validated their claims. But instead, you stayed composed. You let their actions speak louder than your defense ever could. Every insult they threw revealed more about them than it did about you. Every accusation became a reflection of their own behavior. You didn't need to argue your truth. You lived it. And that difference became obvious to anyone paying attention. You didn't destroy their image. They did that themselves by trying too hard to destroy yours. When you don't match someone's energy, you force them to sit with their own. And that's where the real discomfort begins. You became something they couldn't handle, a mirror. Your composure reflected everything they tried to hide. The calmer you stayed, the more obvious their behavior became. You didn't need to expose them publicly. Your presence alone made it impossible for them to hide behind their performance. That's what real composure does. It doesn't just protect you, it reveals everything around you. They expected drama, but you gave them discipline. They expected chaos, but you gave them control. And in that contrast, the truth became clear without a single argument. You didn't ruin their reputation. Their own actions did that, and all you did was stay consistent long enough for it to be seen. At some point, you also realized something deeper. Retaliation comes at a cost. Every time you respond from anger, you lose a piece of your peace. It might feel satisfying in the moment, but it drains your focus and keeps you tied to something you've already outgrown. You understood that revenge is often chosen by people who have nothing better to build. And you had too much ahead of you to stay stuck proving a point. So instead of reacting, you redirected your energy. You stepped out of that cycle completely. You saw how it works: provocation, reaction, escalation, and you chose not to participate. That wasn't weakness. That was awareness. You stopped trading your growth for temporary emotional victories. You treated your peace like something valuable, something not everyone has access to. Every insult, every betrayal, every attempt to provoke you was like a demand for your energy, and you declined it. You chose progress over pettiness. You turned the experience into something useful. Pain became motivation. Disappointment became clarity. You learned from it instead of getting stuck in it. And that's why you moved forward differently, not just away from them, but toward a stronger version of yourself. You also stopped seeing humiliation as something to hide. Instead, you treated it like evidence, proof of what you survived, what you learned, and what you outgrew. You didn't erase it. You studied it. Every moment became information. You noticed patterns, behaviors, and intentions. You saw who stayed, who disappeared, and who showed up when it mattered. And instead of becoming bitter, you became aware. That awareness changed everything. You stopped trusting words without actions. You stopped ignoring patterns just because you wanted to believe differently. You didn't just heal. You evolved with understanding, and that's why your peace feels different now. It's not something temporary. It's something you built. You know exactly what it cost, and you don't take it lightly. Eventually, you reached a point where you stopped giving everyone full access to you. You became selective, not out of coldness, but out of clarity. You realized not everyone deserves your time, your energy, or your emotional investment. You stopped overextending yourself for people who offered very little in return. You understood that constant giving without balance leads to exhaustion, not connection. And you chose balance. You started treating your energy like something valuable. Not every situation needed your reaction. Not every person needed your explanation. Sometimes a quiet acknowledgement, or nothing at all, was enough. That's not detachment. That's discipline. You learned that boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about deciding who gets to stay close. And instead of matching chaos, you adjusted access. You came to understand that control was never about overpowering others. It was about governing yourself. You stopped reacting on cue just because someone expected a reaction from you. You spoke when it held meaning, responded when it carried value, and stepped away when peace mattered more than proving a point. That kind of calm unsettles people who are used to emotional excess. They label you distant or cold, not because you lack feeling, but because they can't influence what's measured and intentional. But you know better. Minimalism was never about caring less. It was about caring with awareness. You began to treat your energy like currency, spending it with purpose instead of wasting it on noise. Your restraint refined you. Your silence filtered everything. You stopped offering empathy to those who only came to take, and in doing so, you became emotionally rich in a way they couldn't understand. Because real strength isn't in constant reaction. It's in choosing your moments and making them count. At some point, your composure became intimidating. Without realizing it, your calm presence started to feel like a quiet threat to people who survive on chaos. In a world fueled by drama, gossip, and impulsive reactions, your maturity stood out in a way that made others uncomfortable. You weren't loud, reactive, or easy to read. You carried yourself with steadiness, and that unpredictability unsettled them. To those addicted to conflict, peace feels unfamiliar, even suspicious. It's the one thing they can't manipulate or measure. And that's why your decency began to look like defiance. When you refused to engage in their patterns, their usual tactics lost effectiveness. You didn't chase rumors or try to defend yourself in every conversation. You kept moving forward, steady and clear. That quiet control made an impression. The same people who expected an outburst were instead confronted with their own reflection. You showed, without saying much, that maturity isn't passive. It's deliberate. You didn't need to create chaos to be seen. Your discipline spoke louder than any reaction ever could. And in a culture that glorifies drama, discipline often looks suspicious. People begin to question how you remain composed, how you don't unravel under pressure, how you continue moving forward without losing yourself. What they fail to see is that your calm wasn't accidental. It was built through lessons, boundaries, and self-respect. You understood something simple, but powerful. Not reacting isn't weakness. It's choosing not to give unnecessary space in your mind to people who haven't earned it. And now, your calm stands out because it's rare. You made kindness look like quiet rebellion, and peace look like something powerful. Then came the deeper shift. You realized that restraint in itself is a form of rebellion. In a world that rewards loud reactions, staying composed is almost radical. Anyone can lash out. Anyone can seek revenge. But it takes a different kind of discipline to remain centered when everything is trying to pull you out of alignment. You mastered that discipline. You chose stillness when noise would have been easier. And that decision changed everything. People wanted you to break character so they could confirm their assumptions. They wanted your anger because it would justify their narrative, but you refused to give them that satisfaction. You didn't bleed for their entertainment. You broke the cycle instead of repeating it. That wasn't submission. That was growth. You turned every urge to react into proof that you've outgrown the version of yourself they were still expecting. Your calm wasn't passive. It was intentional. It was the quiet statement that you could destroy the situation if you wanted to, but you'd rather build something better. And that choice shifted the entire dynamic. You began directing your energy toward progress instead of pettiness. And that made people uncomfortable, especially those who depend on chaos to feel relevant. Your restraint exposed how much others rely on drama to function. You became the disruption without ever raising your voice. And when everything settled, something became clear. You didn't just make it through the chaos, you moved beyond it. You showed that real change doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just stands still, grounded and unmoved. Over time, you also realize something about victory. It's not always about being the brightest or the loudest. Sometimes it's about endurance. You didn't rush to prove yourself. You stayed consistent while others burned out trying to impress. You moved quietly, but with purpose. While others chased attention, you focused on building something that lasts. You understood that validation fades, but consistency compounds. And in the long run, what lasts always matters more than what shines briefly. People underestimated you because you weren't loud about your progress. They mistook patience for passivity. But you weren't standing still. You were building. You weren't trying to outshine them. You were outgrowing them. And when the noise faded, your presence remained. Your integrity stayed intact. Your consistency became its own form of quiet power. You didn't need revenge. Time handled everything. While others performed success, you were actually creating it. You kept showing up, even when no one was watching, even when progress felt slow, because you understood that real strength is built in endurance, not in moments of applause. And eventually, that endurance set you apart. You proved something most people ignore. Longevity always beats loudness. And through all of this, your understanding of strength changed. You stopped seeing it as dominance or control over others. You started seeing it as self-regulation, as staying grounded when everything tries to shake you. You didn't need to raise your voice to be heard. You didn't need to tear others down to feel secure. You stood firm in who you are, and that quiet confidence spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. You faced disrespect, betrayal, and pressure. But instead of becoming bitter, you became better. You refined yourself instead of reacting. You chose growth over resentment. That's not weakness. That's transformation. Most people recognize strength only when it's loud, but yours was steady. It showed up in how you handled things, not in how you announced them. You stopped trying to prove yourself and started becoming someone who no longer needed to. Your actions became your message. Your consistency became your voice. And in the end, everything they threw at you didn't break you. It clarified you. It showed you who you are, what you value, and what you're no longer willing to tolerate. You didn't chase validation. You became it. You didn't fight for justice. You embodied it. You didn't let anger define your path. You let composure shape it. And that's what makes your story different. It's not just about survival. It's about evolution. You turned pain into perspective. You turned pressure into precision. You turned chaos into clarity. You didn't just get through it. You grew beyond it. So when people look at you now, they don't see the version they once underestimated. They see someone who stayed grounded, who chose discipline over drama, and who refused to become what they were trying to provoke. If this message resonated with you, stay connected for more conversations like this. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't react. It's remain exactly who you are, no matter what tries to change you.